They slammed the door on me that night, my grandsons, my blood. They didn't shout, didn't explain. Just a clean click of the lock while their laughter swelled behind the wood. I stood there in the snow, watching my breath turn to smoke. To them, I wasn't a grandfather anymore. I was clutter to be tossed out. The porch light buzzed, dim, flickering like it was mocking me. Inside, I heard the clink of glasses, the rise of a drunk song, chairs scraping against the floor. For a long minute, I waited, foolish, thinking maybe the door would open again, maybe one of them would laugh and say, "Just kidding, Grandpa, come in." No one came. I walked. The streets were cruel that night, every house glowing warm, every window a reminder of where I didn't belong. Families leaned toward each other across tables. Children pressed their noses to frosted glass. I dragged my feet through the slush, shoes soaked, coat thin, head buzzing with a single thought. So, this is how it ends. The shelter wasn't much. Cots lined wall to wall, the air heavy with bleach and the sharp smell of unwashed socks. A volunteer pressed a cup of soup into my hands. Steam curled upward, fogging my glasses. I sipped, and humiliation scalded me more than the broth. Around me, men coughed. Someone muttered in his sleep. A woman sobbed into her sleeve. That was my choir. That was my Christmas. I lay awake that night under a paper-thin blanket, my body cold, but my mind burning. I made a vow in the dark, not to God, not to anyone else, just to myself. Next Christmas would be different. I wouldn't be the one freezing outside. I wouldn't be the forgotten man. I'd be the one holding all the strings. Spring came. The vow stayed. My older grandson Eddie was wasting away in rehab. Pale face, hollow eyes, tethered to IV tubes. I caught sight of him once through the clinic glass. He didn't notice me. He never did. The nurse at the door wouldn't share details. Confidentiality, she said, but her slip of the tongue gave me more than enough. Another nail for the box. Caleb, the younger, was worse. Gambling his life away, crawling to loan sharks with hands that shook more than his dice ever did. I followed him once, stayed back by the bar at a casino downtown. Saw him lose big, saw him stumble out to an alley, saw him meet a man with a gold ring and a stare that promised pain. The handshake lingered too long, the cash too thin. I memorized every detail, proof. Piece by piece, I collected it all. Police reports, medical slips, photographs. Every paper slid neatly into a wooden box beneath my bed. The box grew heavy, but I carried it gladly. It wasn't a burden, it was ammunition. At night, I'd sit by my window and watch the glow of the porch across the street. My neighbor's boy, Daniel, always out there, hauling groceries, mowing lawns, shoveling snow with quiet grit. He'd wave at me sometimes, always respectful, always kind. Strange, isn't it? Strangers' children remembering manners my own blood forgot. The year turned. Leaves browned, the air sharpened, frost returned, and so did my plan. I dressed the house carefully that December. Candles on the mantel, pine branches on the sill, cinnamon heavy in the air. The fire roared steady, flames licking the logs like they knew what was coming. A tree blinked with lights, ornaments shining too brightly. On the surface, it was the perfect holiday scene. Too perfect. I sent them invitations. Simple, short, polite. They came, of course. Why wouldn't they? They thought I was desperate for company. They thought I'd forgotten. Eddie entered first, reeking faintly of whiskey beneath a splash of cologne. His smile was hollow, a crack in plaster. Caleb followed, loud and careless, slapping my back as if we were equals. "Grandpa," Caleb grinned, "didn't think you could still pull off something like this." I smiled, calm, steady. "Oh, I've had a busy year," I said. They laughed, poured cider, filled their plates. They thought it was a night of forgiveness. They thought I was still the man they could lock out and forget. But as the fire cracked, sparks leaping toward the chimney, I sat back and watched. Watched the flames, watched their careless faces, watched the night take its shape. And I thought, they don't know it yet. But this is the beginning of the end. They filled their glasses like they owned the place. Caleb leaned back in my armchair, feet stretched out, smirking as if my living room were just another casino lounge. Eddie coughed into his fist, the smell of cheap whiskey leaking through his cologne, and asked if I had any stronger stuff than cider. I shook my head. He laughed. Figures. I watched them eat, piled their plates high with ham, potatoes, pie. Food I'd spent hours preparing. Forks clinked, chairs squeaked, laughter ricocheted off the walls. My walls. But in the middle of it all, their voices carried just enough for me to hear the truth they thought was hidden. "Looks like the old man's trying too hard," Caleb muttered, stuffing pie into his mouth. "He probably thinks this is forgiveness or something." Eddie snorted. "Forgiveness? He should be thanking us. We gave him space last year. He forgets we've got our own lives, always hanging on, always needing." The words hit, but not like they used to. They didn't sting anymore. They confirmed. Every insult was another brick in the wall I was building, brick by brick, silence by silence. I smiled politely. "Need more pie?" They didn't hear the edge in my voice. Later, I slipped away to the kitchen. The house was warm, the fire still burning steady in the next room. I rinsed a plate slowly under hot water, steam rising around my hands. My reflection wavered in the window above the sink, lined face, tired eyes, but steady. Not broken, not anymore. In the dining room, Caleb's voice rose again, careless as ever. "So, when's the old man finally handing this place over?" "You think we'll have to fight for it?" Eddie grumbled. "He can't live here forever." "It's wasted on him. 2 bedrooms, all this space, and for what? He barely moves from that chair." I dried the plate, set it down carefully. Their words weren't knives, they were confirmations. Proof of what I already knew. They didn't see a grandfather, they saw a deed with legs. I returned, smiling as if I'd missed nothing, my hands steady, my voice calm. "Glad you boys came tonight. Means a lot." Eddie looked at me, half suspicious, then shrugged. "Sure, Grandpa. Family, right?" Family. I almost laughed. The night dragged on, their jokes louder, their demands sharper. Caleb asked for cash, just until payday. Eddie hinted he might need help covering the next clinic bill. They didn't notice the way I leaned back, listening, every word carefully tucked away. When they left near midnight, their boots crunching on the frosted path outside, I stayed in the doorway, watching their silhouettes fade under the street lamp. My porch light flickered again, buzzing weakly in the cold. Inside, I sat by the fire, the wooden box at my feet. I pulled it open. The papers weighted, neat and heavy. Rehab records, police slips, debt notices, each one a truth they couldn't hide from forever. I ran my hand over the edges, the way a soldier runs his hand across the stock of a rifle before battle. I thought of Daniel, my neighbor's boy. Just that afternoon, he'd carried groceries for his mother, nodded politely at me, wished me a good evening. Simple decency. Something my own blood had forgotten long ago. The contrast gnawed at me, and then it sharpened into clarity. The next morning, I started small. I walked to town, the air crisp, snow crunching under my boots. At the coffee shop, I asked the girl behind the counter for a newspaper. She handed me one with a smile that almost startled me. Genuine kindness still existed somewhere. Back home, I spread the paper on the table, tracing the names in the crime blotter with my finger. Arrests for DUI, disorderly conduct, fraud, ordinary sins of ordinary men. But there was space enough for my grandsons to join the list. One drunk, one gambler. It was only a matter of time, and I could help time along. That evening I tested the waters. I called Eddie. His voice was thick, slow, like he was dragging himself through the fog. "Grandpa," he croaked. "Just checking in," I said softly. "How's the program?" Silence. Then a laugh, brittle and weak. "None of your business, old man." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I let the silence hang until he muttered something about being busy and hung up. Caleb was easier. He picked up quick, his tone fake bright, the way gamblers talk when they're in a hole. "Grandpa, you got a minute? I've been thinking about investments. There's this opportunity, but I'd need some capital." I smiled at the empty room. "We'll talk soon," I said, then clicked off. Both calls went into the box, not on paper, but in memory. Every word another tally mark. Days turned into weeks. Snow piled high on the porch. The fire kept me company. The box grew heavier. My plan sharpened, piece by piece, like a blade against stone. And then, one night, it happened. The knock at the door was sharp, hurried. I opened it to find Daniel, cheeks flushed from the cold, breath puffing in white clouds. "Sir," he said, voice steady but eyes uncertain, "I think you should know something." About Caleb. The fire crackled behind me. My hand tightened on the doorframe. What about him? I asked. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in closer. And what he whispered next changed everything. Daniel's breath fogged in the cold as he leaned closer to my doorway. His voice was low, urgent. I saw Caleb, he said, at the pawn shop. He was trying to sell his grandfather's watch, said it belonged to his old man. I didn't answer right away. My hand tightened on the doorframe. That watch wasn't Caleb's. It was mine, my father's before me. Gold, scratched, but still ticking. I had given it to Caleb once, just to wear to a school dance years ago, and now he was hawking it to cover his debts. Daniel shook his head. The shopkeeper turned him away. Said it looked stolen. He stormed off swearing. The fire cracked behind me. My living room glowed warm, cinnamon still faint in the air from the cookies I'd baked earlier. But all I felt was cold. Thank you, Daniel, I said quietly. You've done right by telling me. He nodded, nervous. I didn't want to meddle, sir. But I thought you should know. I closed the door, locked it, and stood for a long while with my back pressed to the wood. That was the moment I knew. Watching, waiting, collecting wasn't enough anymore. They had crossed from neglect into theft. My patience had to end. I opened the wooden box. The papers stared back. Rehab slips, police warnings, debt records. I laid them out on the table like cards in a game I finally intended to play. The watch theft was the missing piece. The one detail that tied Caleb to more than shame. It tied him to crime. The next morning, I walked into town. Snow crunched under my boots, the air sharp, the world brittle with winter silence. At the police station, I asked for an officer. They didn't question me much. Old men don't usually come carrying files like mine. I slid the documents across the desk. The officer raised an eyebrow, flipping through the papers slowly, his lips tightening. Your grandson? He asked finally. Yes, I said. My voice didn't waver. Both of them, one drowning in drink, the other in debt. I've kept records. You'll see everything you need. He studied me, maybe waiting for guilt, hesitation, something. I gave him nothing. By the time I left the station, the sky was the color of steel. My breath came sharp in the air, but my steps were lighter. I had made my first move, quiet, clean. That evening, the phone rang. Eddie. Grandpa, he slurred, you wouldn't believe the day I had. The clinic's threatening me again. They said, well, doesn't matter. I just need a little cash to smooth it over. I let the silence stretch, steam curled from my cup of tea on the table beside me. You there? His voice cracked. I'm here, I said softly. And I know everything, Eddie. What's that supposed to mean? It means the world doesn't look away forever. Sooner or later, someone notices. He cursed under his breath. Then the line went dead. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat in the quiet, staring at the fire as sparks leapt and died. The first strike had landed. They didn't know how deep yet, but the ground under them was already shifting. 3 days later, Caleb came pounding on my door, his face pale, his eyes wild. What did you do? He hissed. I tilted my head. Come inside, Caleb. Warm yourself. He refused. His boots stomped the porch boards. Don't play games with me, old man. The cops came around asking questions. You think I don't know that was you? I looked at him calmly, my breath fogging in the doorway. Maybe they just finally started paying attention. His jaw clenched. You're gonna regret this. The threat hung in the cold like smoke. I didn't answer, just closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place. And on the other side, I heard him kick the porch rail, heard the wood crack, heard his footsteps storm away. Inside, the fire glowed steady, shadows dancing across the walls. My box sat open on the table, empty spaces waiting for the next pieces of evidence I would collect. The first strike was done. But strikes don't end wars. They only start them, and I knew my grandsons weren't going to take this quietly. The next night, as I sat by the window, I saw it. Headlights pausing at the end of my drive, engine idling too long, a silhouette in the driver's seat, watching, waiting, not Daniel, not a neighbor. It was Caleb. And he wasn't alone. The car idled too long at the end of my driveway. The engine hummed, headlights slicing the winter dark into harsh white beams. I stood at the window, the fire behind me painting my back an orange glow, and I watched without moving. Caleb was in the driver's seat. I couldn't see the face of the man next to him, but I knew the type: broad shoulders, restless hands, someone who didn't come for family dinners. Lone shark muscle. For a full minute, they just sat there, smoke from their exhaust curling into the night air. Then the car rolled away slow, tires crunching over ice, until the red taillights dissolved into the dark. I didn't follow. I didn't flinch. I just whispered to the fire, "So, they want to play." The next day, Eddie came stumbling to my porch around noon. His coat hung open, his shoes untied, his face blotched red from cold and liquor both. He knocked once, weakly, then let himself in like he still owned the place. "Grandpa," he slurred, you've been talking to cops." He reeked of whiskey, eyes bloodshot, voice sharp with paranoia. "They asked me questions," he continued, waving his arms. "They asked about rehab, about fights, about—" "What did you tell them?" I let him rant. Then I handed him a glass of water, steady as stone. "I told them the truth." His face twisted. You can't do that. We're family." Family, that word again. Bitter as ash in my mouth. He shoved the glass back at me, water spilling onto the rug. "You'll regret this," he snapped. "We won't forget it." I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply stepped aside, let him storm out into the snow, his footprints stamping heavy into the white. The door closed, the house fell silent, and I knew the game had changed. That night, I heard voices outside, low, harsh. I slipped to the back window and pulled the curtain just enough. 2 figures near the garage, Caleb and the man from the car. They were arguing, Caleb waving his arms, the other man shaking his head. Money exchanged hands, bills crumpled into pockets. I stayed hidden, heart steady. They weren't there to visit. They were there to scheme. The following morning, I found the first sign, my mailbox bent in half. Metal twisted, snow scattered around it. A message. I bent down, straightened the post as best I could, and laughed to myself. Sarcastic, cold laughter. So this is how men repay their grandfather, by hiring someone to kill a mailbox. But it didn't end there. That week, groceries vanished off my porch. A bag of flour split open across the snow, white powder blowing across the yard like ashes. My shedlock was cut clean, tools scattered, every act sloppy, petty, like children throwing rocks at windows. But behind the pettiness was desperation, and desperation makes men dangerous. Daniel noticed. He came by one afternoon, his scarf pulled tight, breath rising in clouds. "Sir," he said, "do you want me to stay around in the evenings?" "Keep an eye out." I shook my head. "No, Daniel. You've already done enough." But truthfully, his offer warmed me more than the fire ever could. That boy, barely out of high school, showed me more loyalty than 2 grown grandsons ever had. I started writing letters that night, to my lawyer, to the police, to myself. Notes, dates, descriptions, every broken lock, every missing grocery, every shadow on my porch. I documented it all, careful and deliberate, because revenge isn't noise, it's paperwork. The real strike was still coming, and I wanted no cracks in it. One evening, while I was sorting papers at the table, the phone rang. Caleb, his voice sharp, too sharp. "You think you're clever, old man, turning us in, talking to cops. That house won't be yours much longer." "Really?" I said, my tone light. "Who do you think it belongs to?" Silence. Then a laugh, dry and bitter. "To us. It always has. You're just a placeholder." I smiled into the receiver. A placeholder with the deed. He swore and hung up. I placed the phone down, calm as ever, but inside I felt it, the shift. The first strike had landed, and now the counterpunch was winding up. The storm broke 2 nights later. I woke to the sound of glass shattering, sharp, clean, like a gunshot in the dark. My heart didn't race. It steadied. I rose from my chair, the fire behind me glowing low, and reached for the flashlight on the shelf. In the kitchen, cold wind rushed through a broken window, snowflakes swirling in across the floor. The curtains flapped wildly, and on the counter, beneath the shards of glass, lay a note scrawled in a shaking hand. "This isn't over." The snow on my kitchen floor glittered under the moonlight. Sharp little diamonds scattered among the shards of broken glass. The note lay there in the middle, words crooked and angry. "This isn't over." I crouched, careful not to cut my palms, and picked it up. Their handwriting was sloppy, rushed, fueled by panic. Panic I'd planted. Panic I intended to water. I swept the glass into a dustpan, poured it into the trash, then patched the window with cardboard until morning. My hands never trembled, not once. Because what they didn't realize was this. Every act of intimidation, every broken mailbox and shattered window was evidence, and I had already started collecting it. The next day I went to the station again. The officer who'd taken my first files frowned when he saw me. "Back already?" I laid the note on his desk, alongside photos I'd taken of the mailbox, the torn shedlock, the spilled groceries in the snow. Cold proof. He picked up the note carefully, reading the words twice. "You're sure this is your grandson?" I almost laughed. Who else would threaten an old man with cardboard handwriting and no imagination? The officer smirked despite himself. "We'll log it. If anything escalates, call immediately." "Oh," I said, voice cool. "It will escalate." On my walk back, the air bit cold against my cheeks, and I noticed footprints in the fresh snow along the side of my house. Not mine, not Daniel's. Heavy boots pacing back and forth, circling like wolves. They wanted me rattled. They wanted me begging. Instead, I took out my camera and snapped every print before the sun could soften them. That evening, I called Daniel over. He arrived with his scarf still frosted, cheeks red, eyes alert. He looked at the patched window and frowned. "They're trying to scare you," he said. "They'll fail," I replied. I handed him a stack of papers from the wooden box. "Take these to your father. He's steady. He knows people. Keep them safe from me. And if anything happens, if they try to spin their story, this is the truth." Daniel didn't question me. He tucked the papers under his arm, nodded once, and left. Strange, isn't it? The boy across the street had become my shield, while my own blood became the knife at my throat. The next move had to be mine. I started with Eddie. I knew his weakness, the bottle. Rehab might clean his veins for a week, maybe 2, but desperation always crawled back under his skin. So, I made a call, not to him, but to the clinic. A concerned relative, I said. I gave them details, dates, places, near misses I'd witnessed. Enough that they flagged his file for closer review. Next time he stumbled through their doors, there'd be no easy way out. Then Caleb. His addiction was greed, his battlefield, the casino. So, one night, I went myself. I wore my oldest coat, kept to the shadows near the bar, and watched. He was there. Of course he was. Chips scattered in front of him, sweat beading at his temples, his smile too wide, too forced. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. The way he palmed cash under the table. The way he scribbled on a slip, not for the dealer, but for the man hovering near his shoulder. I waited until he left, until he disappeared into the alley where the loan shark always lingered. I didn't follow too close, just enough to catch the exchange. Caleb's hands shook as he took the roll of bills. His voice carried, desperate. "I'll have more next week, I swear," the man laughed. "Next week, or you'll pay another way." I slipped back into the night, my lips curling in a bitter smile. Another piece of evidence, another nail in their coffin. By the time I reached home, the snow had started again, flakes drifting soft and steady under the glow of the street lamp. My porch light buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the yard. I thought of my father's watch, the one Caleb had tried to pawn. I thought of Eddie, slurring into the phone, begging for money while he drowned himself sip by sip. And I thought of Daniel, steady as stone, carrying my papers without complaint. That night, I sat at my table, spread everything before me, and began writing. Not a letter, not a note, a full statement, detailed and cold, tying every thread together. Rehab violations, gambling debts, criminal threats, harassment. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was record keeping, and records don't lie. I sealed the statement in an envelope, pressed it flat with my hand, and placed it in the fireproof box under the floorboard. Insurance. 3 nights later, the storm hit. Wind howled against the windows. Snow slapped sideways against the house. In the middle of it all, the knock came, hard, frantic. I opened the door to find Daniel, soaked to the bone, eyes wide with fear. "They followed me," he gasped. "2 men. They know I've been helping you. They said I'd better keep quiet, or..." The words choked in his throat. Behind him, through the swirl of snow, I saw it. A car idling at the end of the street, headlights glowing like eyes, waiting. The storm swallowed the street, snow swirling like smoke, wind clawing at the eaves. Daniel stood in my doorway, drenched, eyes wide with something more than cold, fear. "They followed me," he said, breath ragged. "Two men. They know I've been helping you. They told me to keep my mouth shut, or else." Behind him, through the snow, I saw the car. Engine humming, headlights glowing like a predator's eyes, waiting, watching. I pulled him inside, locked the door. The fire roared behind us, heat spilling across the room. His jacket dripped onto the floorboards, leaving dark stains. He was just a boy, shoulders too narrow to carry this weight. Yet here he was, caught in my storm. I handed him a towel. "You did right," I said. "Sit. Warm yourself." He shook his head, hands trembling. "They'll come back." I stirred the fire with the poker, sparks leaping up like startled birds. "Let them!" Because this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Retaliation wasn't a setback, it was confirmation. They had shown their teeth. Now I had license to finish what I started. That night, I wrote until dawn. Notes, statements, times, faces. Every detail Daniel remembered about the car, the men, their threats. I added it all to the file, my file, the wooden box that had grown heavier with each betrayal. By sunrise, the storm eased. The world lay buried under white silence, clean on the surface, but dangerous underneath, just like them. I walked Daniel home, my boots sinking deep into the drifts. His mother opened the door, panic written across her face. She pulled him inside, thanked me with tears in her eyes. Behind her, their little house smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Real warmth. The kind my own blood had stripped from me long ago. On the walk back, I stopped at the edge of my driveway. Something glinted in the snow. A broken bottle, jagged, its green shards scattered like seeds. Deliberate. A message. I picked one up, turned it in my hand until the winter sun caught the edge. My reflection wavered there, split and warped. I slipped it into my pocket. Another piece of evidence. That afternoon, I called the officer again. He sighed when he heard my voice, but when I listed the threats, the stalking, the broken glass, his tone shifted. "This is no longer family squabbling," he said. "This is harassment. Possibly worse. We'll assign a patrol." "Good. Let them circle. Let them see the squad car crawl past my house at night. Let Eddie and Caleb know the law had begun to take an interest." But I wasn't finished. That evening, I called the rehab clinic again. This time, I spoke longer. I told them about Eddie's drinking outside the program, about his erratic calls, about his latest outburst in my home. They listened carefully, then thanked me. Their tone was clipped, professional, but beneath it I heard the click of a trap closing. The next day I went back to the casino. I didn't gamble. I sat in the corner, nursing a black coffee, invisible as wallpaper, and I watched Caleb spiral. His hands shook as he shoved chips into the pot. His smile cracked wider with each loss. He whispered urgently to the man beside him, the one with the gold ring. I leaned in just enough to catch the words. "I'll get it. Just give me another week." The man's reply was cold. "Weeks don't pay debts." I left before they saw me. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked back into the night, the glow of neon fading behind me. The evidence was no longer whispers. It was open, desperate transactions in public, proof waiting to be collected. When I reached home, my porch light buzzed overhead, flickering faint like a tired heartbeat. I looked up at it and smiled bitterly. "Stay with me a little longer," I muttered. "We're almost done." The mailbox had been repaired, the shed relocked, the window patched, but scars remained. And scars tell stories. Inside, I set the kettle on the stove, steam curling as the whistle began to rise. I poured the water into a chipped mug, tea leaves swirling like dark secrets settling to the bottom. I sipped slowly, staring at the fire, my reflection faint in the glass. An old man, yes, but not defeated, not anymore. And then came the phone call. Not Caleb this time, not Eddie. The voice was different, rough. "You're making mistakes, old man." I didn't speak. "You think cops will protect you. You think paper means anything. You back off, or next time we won't leave just a note." The line clicked dead. I stared at the receiver, steam from my tea fogging the air. Then I laughed, low, cold, because they didn't understand. Threats don't weaken a man who has already been left in the snow to die. They only sharpen him. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not just about protection, but about the deed. Draw up the papers, I told him. The house won't go to my grandsons. It will go to Daniel. He's earned it. The lawyer hesitated. Are you sure? I've never been more sure. The silence on the line was heavy. Then he said, very well. I'll prepare the documents. I hung up, sat back, and watched the fire burn low. The house creaked softly in the wind, the old beams settling like bones in winter. Soon, it would no longer be mine. But better to pass it to hands that cared than to hands that would burn it for cash. That night, as snow whispered against the windows, I heard it again. The hum of an engine outside. I slipped to the curtain, pulled it back just enough. The car was back. Same headlights, same idling threat. But this time, the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out. Not Caleb, not Eddie, taller, broader. And in his hand, something metal glinted under the porch light. The figure stepped out of the car, shoulders broad under a dark coat, snow swirling around him like smoke. He walked slow, steady, the crunch of boots carrying across the yard. In his hand, metal caught the porch light. A crowbar, slick with melting flakes. I didn't flinch. I just watched from behind the curtain, the firelight behind me painting my shadow on the wall. He moved closer, scanning the windows, testing the ground like a wolf circling a pen. The front steps groaned under his weight. He raised the crowbar once, twice, then slammed it against the porch rail. Wood cracked, splinters scattering across the snow. A warning. He wanted me rattled. I stepped into the hallway, picked up the phone, and dialed without hesitation. The patrol car I had been promised was only a few streets away. By the time the man circled back to the car, headlights flared at the end of the block, blue and red slicing through the white storm. The crowbar dropped into the snow. He climbed back into the car, engine revving, tires screeching as they sped off. I didn't smile. I didn't relax. Because what I'd just seen wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was escalation. They weren't satisfied breaking windows and mailboxes. Now they were sending muscle with weapons. The officer took my statement, flashlight beams sweeping across the cracked porch. He promised extra patrols, but I could see it in his eyes. The doubt. To him, I was an old man caught in family drama, maybe exaggerating, maybe slipping. Let them doubt. Paper doesn't. The next morning, I added the details to my file. Date, time, description of the man, the crowbar, the damage. Another brick in the wall I was building against them. And then I made a choice. Silence was no longer enough. It was time to move from defense to offense. I began with Caleb. I returned to the casino 2 nights later, same corner seat, same chipped mug of coffee. He was there, pale and frantic, chips scattered like breadcrumbs. The man with the gold ring hovered again, whispering threats in his ear. I waited until Caleb left, then followed at a distance, notebook in my pocket, camera in hand. In the alley, the exchange played out just like before, but this time, I stepped closer. The flash of my camera split the night. Caleb spun around, eyes wide, sweat shining on his brow. "Grandpa!" His voice cracked. I lowered the camera. "They smile," I said flatly. "Evidence looks better when it's clear." His face twisted. You can't," but I already had what I needed. The next day, I visited the rehab clinic again. Eddie had checked himself in after another binge. I walked the sterile halls, the smell of disinfectant sharp, nurses moving briskly past. Through the glass window of the lounge, I saw him, slumped in a chair, IV drip tethered to his arm, staring at the floor like the world had gone quiet. He looked up once, saw me, and his lips curled in a sneer. Weak, but bitter. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I read it anyway. Traitor. I didn't respond. I just raised my hand, held up the file I carried, and tapped it once against the glass. His eyes flickered. He knew. He knew the walls were closing in. That evening, Daniel stopped by again. He carried a thermos of coffee from his mother, steam curling in the cold air. He set it on my table without a word, but his eyes told me he knew things were getting darker. "You don't have to be part of this," I told him. He shook his head. "I already am." "You didn't choose that. They did." I studied him, the firelight flickering against his face. This boy, this neighbor's son, had stood by me more firmly than my grandsons ever had. That thought stung, but it also steadied me, because it gave me clarity about where everything would end. The next step was legal. I met with my lawyer again, papers spread across his oak desk, the smell of old books heavy in the room. He reviewed the file, page by page, his brow furrowing deeper with each document. "You've built quite the case," he said finally. "I don't want a case," I replied. "I want closure. Make the deed transfer airtight. Daniel inherits this house, and prepare a statement for the police, with every file attached. When the time comes, it all goes in." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have it ready." Walking home, the snow crunched under my boots. The sky was pale, low, heavy with more to come. I felt lighter, though. The plan was no longer forming. It was formed. But plans don't stop men like Eddie and Caleb. Fear makes them reckless. That night, just after midnight, I heard it. The back door rattling. Slow at first, then harder. The lock strained. I rose from my chair, took the flashlight, and moved silently into the hallway. The fire still glowed low in the hearth, casting faint orange light across the floorboards. The rattling stopped. Then came a whisper. 2 voices. Eddie's, slurred and frantic. Caleb's, sharper, desperate. "He has it all in there," Caleb hissed. "We get the box. We get everything." "We should just torch it," Eddie muttered. "End it?" My grip tightened on the flashlight. The box, they knew. They wanted the evidence. I stood in the dark, silent, listening to my grandsons plotting against me like burglars outside a stranger's house. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached for the phone. The phone felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any weapon. I dialed slow, steady. The dispatcher's voice came through clear, calm. "There are 2 men at my back door," I said, "trying to break in." "Ah, yes, I know who they are. My grandsons." Silence on the line, then the clipped reply. "Units on the way. Stay inside." I hung up and set the receiver down. The fire flickered behind me, sparks leaping up, shadows stretching long across the walls. Outside, the whispering grew urgent. The lock rattled again. "We don't have time," Eddie hissed. "Shut up and push harder," Caleb snapped. I didn't move. I let them work, let their desperation sweat through the wood. The longer they tried, the more the evidence wrote itself. Headlights cut across the yard minutes later. Blue and red lights flashing against the snow. Sirens low but undeniable. The boys cursed, boots scrambling across the porch, voices cracking with panic. "Go, go!" Caleb barked, but it was too late. Officers were already out, flashlights slicing through the night. "Hands where we can see them." One barked. I stood in the hallway, watching shadows stumble across my walls. My grandsons, my blood pressed against the snow, wrists cuffed, curses spilling out like cheap liquor. When the officer knocked on my front door, I opened it slowly, his breath curled in the cold. "We've got them," he said. "They'll be booked tonight. Do you want to file full charges?" I glanced past him at Eddie's face, pale and wild. Caleb's eyes, darting, furious, family reduced to suspects. I let the silence stretch, then said, "Yes. Full charges, every one." The officer nodded. No pity, no hesitation, just duty. Inside, the house glowed warm again. I poured myself tea, steam rising in lazy curls, and sat at the table. The wooden box lay open before me, empty now. I had passed everything to the lawyer, to the police, to the world beyond these walls. My role was finished. 2 days later, I sat in the lawyer's office. The deed lay on the desk, papers neat, pen gleaming. Daniel sat beside me, nervous, his hands folded tight. "This isn't right," he whispered. "It's your house." I looked at him, steady. "It was never about walls and wood. It's about legacy, and you've shown more decency in a year than my grandsons have in their lives." He hesitated, then signed, his name etched where theirs never would. The house passed quietly, legally, permanently. When we stepped outside, snow was falling soft, the sun a weak glow behind the clouds. Daniel's mother waited at the curb, relief plain in her eyes. They waved as they drove away. I stood there a long while, breath curling white in the cold air, watching until the car turned the corner. That evening, I sat by the fire one last time. The house hummed with old memories, birthdays, laughter, footsteps long gone. I let them wash over me, then fade. Tomorrow, the keys would no longer be mine. The phone rang once more before I left. The jail, Eddie's voice, desperate, raw. "Grandpa, please, don't do this. We're family." Family, that word again, a hollow shell. I listened, let him beg, let his voice crack and crumble. Then I said the only truth left. Family is what you prove, not what you claim. And I hung up. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. That night, I walked the empty rooms, touching the walls, the windows, the worn banister. I wasn't sad, not exactly, more like hollow, steady, the way a man feels after burying something that had already been dead a long time. Before dawn, I left the house keys on the table for Daniel. The fire had burned low, embers glowing faint red, smoke curling lazily up the chimney. I pulled on my coat, stepped into the cold, and shut the door behind me. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked down the street. The sky was pale, brittle blue. My breath hung in the air like ghosts of all the words I'd never said. I didn't look back, because revenge isn't fireworks. It isn't glory. It's silence. It's the sound of doors closing forever, and that's what I gave them.